Hi there, my name is Emma and I'm with Brushstrokes Tustin, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to make this cute little wooden Happy Easter sign. This came with our paint kit, so thank you so much for purchasing one. In it should have paint, brushes, a napkin, a paper plate to put your paint on. It should have a wooden sign, a ribbon, and something to trace the Happy Easter, which is some transfer paper that we will use later. But before we get started, I do want to let you know that this is acrylic paint, which means it's permanent. It will stain your clothes, so I recommend putting on an old t-shirt or an apron, and if you've got long sleeves, go ahead and roll those up to protect your clothes. I also want you to protect the surface you're working on, so maybe put down some newspaper or some butcher paper, any old papers you have, just to protect your table that you'll be working on for today. So with that, I think we can go ahead and get painting. Okay, so I've got all my supplies set up. I've got my samples so you can see it. I've got my new wood. I have my paint, brushes, and water. You definitely want to pour out some water. You can use a plastic cup, paper cup, mason jar, anything. Just fill something with a little bit of water so we can rinse our brush off in between colors. When you pour out your paint, you can do it in any way you want and use whatever. I would recommend using maybe like a plastic knife or something you can kind of wipe off in between colors. You're gonna have a little bit bigger of a plate, but just for space for this video, I've got a pretty small plate going here. Try to make them spaced out so you have plenty of room to mix your colors on that plate. If they touch, it's okay, but just try to space them out if you can. So I think that we can go ahead and get started. You can see that mine's a little bit imperfect, which is why I'm using it. I actually used this, surprise, surprise, for a different one. So I'm trying to conserve over here, but ignore my little stains up here. We're just going to go ahead and paint right over them. So I'm going to take my biggest brush and I'm going to start with a nice light teal color. Now you could do whatever color you want for the background. I would not recommend doing anything too dark because we're doing the Happy Easter in black. But if you want to do pink, yellow, any color you want, you can totally do that. And then you would do these Easter eggs the opposite. I wouldn't necessarily do white if you're planning on doing the daisies though. So there's that. But I'm gonna get teal. I am going to grab my biggest brush, get some white, and then I'll also get a little bit of green. Mix that in, and a little bit off the edge of my blue. A little bit more blue. Now this got really dark. I'll go ahead and get more white. Now I've got a nice light teal. I can start spreading that across my wood. Now, it is important to note that I've got the two holes at the top. That's going to be the top where I'm going to hang it from, and I want to paint with the wood grain. And I don't want this to necessarily be too perfect, so if I've got some parts that are lighter, some darker, that's totally fine. Now optionally, if you want to be able to see a little bit of the wood grain, you can use the water to spread out your paint, kind of get it wet first, and if it's wet, let's see. If it's wet, you'll be able to see the wood grain a little bit. It kind of dulls the paint out. So if you want it to show the effect of wood, you can add a little bit of water to your paint as you're doing this, and it'll spread a little bit more easily, and then it'll be a little bit see-through, almost like that little mark up there. That is some watery teal. So I am just going to fill this whole thing in with teal. Again, doesn't have to be perfect. If I've got darker parts, if I've got lighter parts, that's totally fine. I really like the weathered effect, but if you want it to be more solid, then mix a pile. And I don't think we're gonna be using this color again, so if you want to use all of your green and blue, but just make sure you're using enough white, and we will use white again, so don't use all of your white up, but make sure you're mixing enough for this, and just fill in the whole background. Okay, now that I'm done with my background, as you can see, I've got lots of different colors of teal. It's a little bit darker than this one, totally up to you how you want to do it, but it's super, super important that we let this dry completely. It has to be 100% dry or our tracing paper will not work. So I'm gonna go ahead and blow dry mine off and bring it back. But if you don't have a blow dryer, you should only have to wait, I would say maximum 5 minutes is my guess, depending on how you applied the paint, but it won't work if it's still wet. So make sure that it's nice and dry. You can see mine is still wet. It came off on my finger. So I'm gonna go ahead and dry that off, but definitely essential to the tracing that this is nice and dry. So go ahead, pause this video, let it dry, and then we'll come back and we'll trace. Okay, so now that my surface is completely dry, I can prepare to trace my Happy Easter on. So I want to grab my tracing paper and my word. So for the tracing paper, you want to make sure you're using the side that's black, not gray. It's more dull. If you touch it, it'll get on your fingers, but you don't want to use this gray side. You want that side facing towards you, but this black side, see how it's a little bit darker? You want to use the dark side down. Dark side down. You're going to place that right in the middle. And then you're going to put your Happy Easter right over it. Let's try to make sure that I am centered. That looks pretty centered to me. And then I'm going to grab a pen. I recommend using a pen instead of a pencil just because it's got a harsher point. It doesn't matter what color, obviously it's not going to show, but you definitely want to make sure that it's got a nice hard point and you're pressing really hard, and that's what's going to create the transfer. There is stuff on the back of here that's going to transfer onto our wood. So again, make sure it's nice and centered because these are the top right here, so make sure it's nice and level, and then I want to start outlining these as if they're bubble letters. I don't want to do just one line throughout the middle. I want to circle all of these letters like they're bubble letters. So I want to go as closely as possible to each letter, but I do want to go on both sides, on the top and the bottom, and make sure you're getting all of these little circles. So we've got the A inside the two P's, inside the E's, and the R and the A. So lots of little insides that you want to make sure you're not forgetting. So go ahead and start to trace. I'll probably speed mine up a little bit, but just make sure you're going very slowly and being very, very careful. This might look a little bit different because we had some technical difficulties, so starting over, but I pre-traced my Happy Easter. Let's see how it turned out. Beautiful. So I can always go back and erase this, so don't worry if you made a line that you don't like. At the very, very end, I can always erase it. So at this point, I'll take my smallest brush and I'm going to dip it in my black paint, and I'm going to very, very carefully start to fill in my Happy Easter. You want to do nice little brush strokes, go very, very slowly. Make sure you've got enough paint on your brush. You don't want to clump it on there, but make sure you're not using too little paint. Should glide nice and smooth. I like to go from left to right. I'm right-handed, and make sure you're starting at the Happy. So be very, very careful. Don't worry about these tracing marks. We can always erase them later. And I'm going to speed up my process, but feel free to pause the video and carefully fill in the Happy Easter. Okay, so now that it's been traced, we can start working on our Easter eggs. I'm going to rinse my biggest brush off, Make sure it's nice and dry. And I will take some white. I want to do a white base for all of my eggs first. So I'm going to get some white on my biggest brush. I'll start with one down in this right-hand corner. And I want to tilt it a little bit to the left. Now eggs normally are a little bit bigger on the bottom. They're not a perfect oval. They're slightly smaller on one side. So I'm going to take my medium brush or my biggest brush, and I am going to do my first oval that's a little bit smaller on the top side. Now I'm going to go right under the A. I'm going to tilt it a little bit to the right now and start filling my egg in with my base of white. And you can do whatever colors you want for these eggs, but I'm just giving them a base of white to start off with, so they're kind of pre-planned, and then I'll just fill them in a second. Oops. I can cover that up with the flour later. So now I'm going to do my third egg up here. This one's a little bit more straight up, maybe slightly tilted to the right, but again, it has that smaller top and it's a little bit thicker on the bottom. Now I'm going to do my top 3 eggs. I'm going to get some more white paint on my brush. I'll start with this one up here. I'll tilt it slightly to the right. And again, that bottom is still a little bit thicker. And then I'll do my second egg on the top. I'll tilt this one a little bit to the left. It doesn't have to be exactly like this.